Hello and welcome to this special edition tabletop exercise from RANE Network. In this video, founder of RANE, David Lawrence, sits down with three leaders in cybersecurity and reputation management, Raul Muki, Kelly Kimberly, and Kellen Wagner Ramsdell. Our panel will break down what to do in the event an organization is involved in a ransomware attack. Raul Muki is a partner at Cleary Gottlieb, specializing in investigations, enforcement, and regulatory matters, as well as complex commercial litigation. Raul joined Cleary Gottlieb in 2005. From 2010 to 2016, Raul worked in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York as an assistant U.S. attorney. He was a lead prosecutor on significant cases involving public corruption, cybercrime, financial and tax fraud, healthcare fraud, money laundering, and international organized crime. Kelly Kimberly, partner and head of Houston for FGS Global, advises clients on reputation management, financial communications including M&A, shareholder activism, and restructurings. She specializes in crisis and issues management, including responding to and preparing for cyber incidents as a senior member of the cyber team at FGS Global. Earlier in her career, Kelly founded Kimberly Public Affairs and served in several leadership roles at Enron. Kellen Wagner Ramsdell is the Associated Director of Threat Intelligence at Arete, responsible for enabling the delivery of high-quality, clear, concise, and correct intelligence products that enable decision advantage. Her team performs attributions and sanctions assessments on more than 500 ransomware and extortion events each year, specializing in advising a specific threat actor's expected impact in a victim environment. Prior to Arete, Kellen specialized in developing new quantitative analysis methods for defensive and offensive cyber mission sets. She oversaw staff supporting the common vulnerabilities and exposures, MITRE ATT&CK, MITRE DEFEND, and MITRE ENGAGE programs. Let's dive into the discussion. We hope you enjoy this video.
First of all, welcome to the audience. I want to, in advance, thank this great panel that's going to come together and really help give an overview and put some reality around the issues of ransomware. What firms, both in the private and public sector, have to think about in advance, in the moment, and after the fact. The benefit we have here is we have individuals who have actually been through multiple real-world events where ransomware attacks have occurred, and they're going to apply some of the great insights and lessons that they've acquired along the way. We have an interesting scenario. We're going to throw some variations into this, but to begin with, one general observation is that ransomware attacks purposefully often occur at the worst possible times when people and firms are least prepared, whether it's on weekends, during holidays, after hours, etc. They happen quickly, they require quick decisions, and there is a need very much to make sure that firms are surrounded with the areas of expertise that are best equipped, most equipped to obviate, mitigate, respond, etc. And as you'll see from the backgrounds of and the insights of our great panelists, there are a multitude of what I'll refer to as core competencies that are required to manage these situations in an effective way, and obviously to build in the resiliency and the preventative mechanisms that these attacks require. I will also note, as our panelists have informed us repeatedly, these incidents are no longer rare, and they're certainly recurring, and in fact, they are increasing. So there isn't yet an appropriate government response or safety net for firms. Very much they have to operate on their own, but then ultimately in coordination with, very often with law enforcement, regulatory, outside legal counsel, public relations experts, and people who are used to the negotiations. So with that said, let me begin by giving the scenario. We have a company that we refer to as New Eclipse. They are New York based, but they are global in nature. It's a fintech company that provides credit card and other financial and monetary processing services to not only healthcare facilities, but also to a wide range of other transportation spaces and also in terms of other financial institutions. We've experienced a system outage after work hours. We've been notified of this. It's prevented a number of healthcare and other providers from processing payments and otherwise accessing their records. The IT and InfoSec team at New Eclipse, quite frankly, is investigating, but they're very much stymied. And they've learned not only that their network logs are inaccessible, but it looks as though very sensitive and confidential email communications and other data concerning their client base have been compromised and otherwise misappropriated. The attack has cut across the broad spectrum of clients and billing practices. They're unable to process transactions. They're unable to communicate with their clients. And they're also seeing their clients' data uploaded and potentially compromised. As often happens, the senior management is unavailable. They are mid-flight overseas, the CEO, the CTO, the CFO, the COO, for an investor conference. At best, they have some limited Wi-Fi connectivity, but it is not proven to be particularly reliable in trying to communicate. So maybe I'll begin here with the following question, which is, who do we need around the table to begin to understand the process, the response, and what we need to have done? And I'll throw that out to the broad panel. Anyone want to jump in?
I am happy to take that one to start. As you said, the InfoSec people are working on this and they have their role, but that's a separate path. We need a group of senior executives from the company, legal, forensics, and strategic communications to be working at a higher level to discuss issues that involve reputation, decision-making that is not related specifically to solving the technical matter at hand. So that's my take. That's very important to get them in place quickly and to meet frequently to stay up to date on the latest information available.
Rahul, you are our counsel. We've called you. You're in Europe. We woke you up in the middle of the night. We've told you.
No.
You never sleep, right? Sharks do not sleep. So we're assembling virtually and in person the boardroom here. We've also brought in one of the heads of our board to understand what we're doing because we're going to need some decisions. What are you beginning to advise us?
Well, one of the first things that's necessary to try to investigate from a legal perspective is what information has potentially been compromised. Obviously, that's critical to know from a business perspective to understand how material this potential incident might be. But from a legal perspective, the information that's critical to know is what information has been impacted and for what individuals. And that goes to whether you're going to have an obligation as a company to notify individuals impacted, whether that's customers, employees, or anyone else whose information the company maintains. The reason why that's critical, not only to comply with legal obligations, but once individuals start being notified with a legal notice, that obviously has follow-on effects for the company's reputation, with investors, with the media. And so really that's one of the first things that we focus on from a legal perspective. There are other factors, obviously, if you're a public company related to disclosure, That's the typical materiality analysis applied to the cyber context, both from what impact is this having on the business quantitatively and qualitatively. There are now timing requirements to make filings with the SEC for public companies within 4 days of a determination of materiality. That last part is key. There has to be a materiality determination. But that has really changed the landscape in the last couple of years.
So Rahul, we're going to put up on the whiteboard in the boardroom, we have to know what information has been compromised. We have a partial view, so we're going to assign our IT people to make the best determination, because down the road, there's disclosure, regulators to clients, consumers, possibly other authorities. So we will do that, but right now we're sort of trying to change the tires on the car while it's going 60 miles an hour. What we do know is our systems have been locked down. We do know that we're starting to get calls from clients who are wondering what has happened. Fortunately, the markets have yet to open. They won't open until 9 a.m. Eastern time. So our share price is, not yet at risk, but information is starting to flow outside. We have thought to contact our insurance company to let them know. And fortunately, Ms. Ramsdell is on the scene now in our boardroom and beginning to advise us how to unpack this and understand the nature of the threat. Would you tell us just a little bit about what you're going to be doing in the boardroom, what we need to do right now?
Absolutely. So in the boardroom, the responsibility of your IT and information security and incident response teams are to give you those critical decision points, right? While we run the very technical incident response processes. So in addition to Rahul's point about identifying which data was accessed and or potentially stolen, exfiltrated from the environment, we're also going to be looking at which systems and reporting that back to you, because that informs the timeline for recovery. Are they down? Are we simply locked out? Is there encryption? There's multiple layers that inform how long it takes to recover. The critical priority there is also assessing our backups. What is there and how quickly can we get those back up and running? Because that is the most critical thing your technical people need to be communicating to your decision makers during a response. It is, what is the timeline for recovery? That's when you start to get those additional questions regarding who is doing it, the threat actor, and your next follow-on steps. You need to know for your existing critical systems, how long does it take to recover those in addition to what data was stolen?
Now, unfortunately, we did not implement redundancy in the cloud. This is, I guess, one of the lessons we're going to learn for the future, which is the importance of having such redundancy, but we don't have it right now. And as a consequence, word is leaking out. We have clients that are calling on a regular basis. Kelly, I think it's fair to assume this is not going to be a secret very long, that just between the number of sources that cover businesses, no less social media, et cetera, our employees, many of whom work remotely, are noting that they can't get access. So there's chatter internally about what is happening here. Our management team is still in the air, and we need to obviously get communications out internally, externally, et cetera. I assume the notion is to at least get ahead of this a little bit, and I guess that's a term that's used. But between you and Rahul, what should we be saying, and to whom should we be saying at this point, where we don't know the sources, we don't know the extent, and we don't know whether we are going to be able to basically get back online and have control again, to Kelly's point, anytime soon?
Okay, so I have 3 subsets of answers to that. Number one, in a situation like this, the first question is, do you have a cyber comms plan to support your incident response plan? That means you're not starting with a blank sheet of paper. You've considered your own culture, you've identified your audiences, and importantly, identified the decision makers. I have seen in more incident than one, the CEO or somebody critical being out of pocket and nobody knows who's in charge. So identifying those people is critical. At the early stages, when it's clear that something has happened like this, I mean, this isn't one you can hide from, but you have to take a very circumspect approach in what you're saying. We have to say something, and we decide whether it's reactive or in some cases proactive. But importantly, being transparent, acknowledging that something has occurred without getting ahead of our skis and providing information that is going to panic people unnecessarily or that turns out to be inaccurate later. If you are inaccurate in your statements, walking that back later is very difficult.
Okay. And just so everyone knows, the abbreviation you used, cybercom plan, is a cyber communications plan.
That's correct. It's the various scenarios and like what would those statements be? And each situation is different, but what would our starting point be that we've all hashed out in advance and people have generally agreed to? Again, so we're not starting from a blank sheet of paper, which makes it much more challenging.
Okay, so something has to be said because word is out. It's not, we no longer have optionality on this. And Rahul, your counsel here is going to be absolutely critical because there are different constituencies. There's obviously the public markets, we're a public company. There's internal communications, there are client communications, and law enforcement and regulators as well. How are you? Not meaning to throw all those balls up in the air. Plus, we have our management team that's still 30,000 feet in the air, but we do have a board member here. What are you thinking about? What are you advising?
I mean, really to emphasize Kelly's last point, which is, typical role of the lawyer advising not to get out ahead of your skis. That's important for all the credibility reasons that Kelly referenced, but legally, that's really where companies have been tripped up in the past. Not that there is an intent to mislead, but there's often business pressure to say something reassuring. And in the scenario, we don't really know much yet. And things obviously can and will change. And so really the whole team working together, counsel, management, the PR advisors, communications advisors, to come up with something that satisfies the various stakeholders is really an important first task in a scenario like this. Once a statement is made, if material information is learned by the company, and they're a public company, and the information is not updated quickly enough in the SEC's view, the SEC has brought cases on that theory that there is a duty to correct inaccurate information. And so there may be a need to put something more specific out there, but need to understand the risks in doing so. And if specific information that's subject to change is stated publicly, then the whole team, including counsel, of course, will be on guard to see if that statement needs to be updated in the future.
And I will just add that comms is our firm is typically engaged by the law firm. This becomes a legal matter the minute something occurs. So we want to make sure we are working in lockstep on messaging to make sure that we're protecting the company to the extent possible.
The other thing I would mention, David, one of the audiences you didn't mention out there of these statements is the threat actor itself.
We are definitely getting there.
They will be reading everything the company puts out. And so that is something that needs to be taken into account potentially.
Let me just sometimes we use terms such as getting ahead of ourselves and the metaphor is always ahead of the tips of the skis. What you guys are actually saying is basically, if you don't know, we have to say we don't know. And we cannot make promises or representations that ultimately you have to be on guard, ultimately may prove to be inaccurate, notwithstanding our best intentions. So everything has to be cleared. Rahul, are you enveloping the boardroom with attorney-client privilege in terms of the communications? You have people who are now, working under your direction and supervision in conjunction with the company. Is that an important consideration as well?
It's a very important consideration, and it's a very hot topic. There's a lot of litigation and discussion over what information can and should be privileged during the response to a cyber attack. I'd say generally the rule of thumb that the courts have laid out is if work is being done and communications are being made primarily for legal purposes to address potential legal liability versus pure business purposes, then information can be privileged. So a few lessons from the cases and the law generally. One is to get counsel involved early. Two, as Kelly mentioned, is to have advisors, including the communication advisors and forensic advisors, engaged by counsel. It's fine to use advisors that the company has used in the past, but I would say if the company does that, it's critical to do a new agreement or a new statement of work that's very specific that this team, this project is for the cyber response and to help advise counsel in representing the company. Third, some courts have even focused on how are the advisors being paid? Is this coming out of the legal budget versus the business budget? So that's one thing to keep in mind. I would then finally, probably the biggest but trickiest factor here is how are you drawing lines around your privileged channel? Not everything is going to be privileged when you're responding to an incident. The courts have said that because you would respond to the incident even if there was no legal risk. There's obviously a lot of business reasons to take the steps that companies take when they're attacked. So you really want to be thoughtful about upfront, discuss with counsel, what is the information that the company really cares about and that's going to go into the legal liability assessment, and make sure that information is treated as privileged, including only involving and sharing reports and communications with those who need to know. And I would just add at the end, the legal steps are very important to preserve the company's options and limit potential exposure. But there are always situations where the business needs of the company may supersede, for example, the decision around who to share a forensic report with. There may be very, very compelling reasons to share that with, for example, business partners who might be concerned what's going on with the company. And so that does happen, and that's a discussion. It's an exercise in preserving your legal options and making sure that you're aware of the potential downsides of taking certain steps.
So we have not just a substantive issue that we're dealing with, there's a process issue. And the main takeaway here, without getting into the fine points of preserving the privilege, there are a number of things that will occur during these attacks. And you want to have outside counsel being thoughtful about setting up the channels of communication, the work stream. If people are outsiders are being deployed and put under agreement, thought to that. And what I will just say to the audience, which is very often the case, when these things do break, notwithstanding legitimate claims of privilege, the government may very well ask the company to waive the privilege and to share the information, which becomes another consideration. But nonetheless, there are processes points that must be considered. And we've just received a ransomware request and a threat to expose, not only to keep our systems locked down, but to expose confidential business plans, email communications of our company, as well as our clients on the dark web if the ransom is not being paid.
So the first step, once you get that demand, and it's really twofold. So for your decision makers, will you pay? There's a lot of other considerations, but some do come in and they say, no matter what, we will not pay a ransom. That is the ethos of our company. We won't do it. And so that's always a question to encourage early before you're in the event, because some say, no, this is our policy and we're going to do it. Okay. We have different steps we can follow. But we need to know who that threat actor is. We need to take every identified artifact associated with their operations and not just say, okay, the threat actor says they're this person. They say they're this group. Are they really? Is this somebody else pretending to be them for some reason? Because we need to now start going through the, will you pay? Maybe you don't know. Maybe you're uncertain. You're not one of those firms that comes in and says, no, we will not pay. You come in and you say, let's find out. All right, so now we start walking through the various negotiation strategies with the threat actor. We want to know, is it legal to facilitate a payment to this threat actor? So we need to assess sanctions exposure in the countries.
Those are U.S. and international sanctions. These are laws that are on the books, prohibited parties making payments, transaction business with them, et cetera. Okay.
Absolutely. So in the United States, it's going to be administered by the Office of Foreign Assets Control. There are then other sanctions regimes. So any country in which you operate, we want to check the sanctions exposure. So it's really critical that we know every single thing about the threat actor to not only go, okay, who are they? And then are they associated with an individual? Have they maybe changed brand names? But they are actually still operated by the individual who is listed on, in the United States' case, the OFAC, Specially Designated Nationals list. Rahul, I see you came off
I
mute.
was just going to add on OFAC. They have made public communications saying that victim companies are not off the hook from making payments to ransomware actors just because they are a victim of extortion. They have not brought that type of action yet based on against a corporate victim, but they've said it's on the table, and they've emphasized in the civil context, at least, the liability is strict liability, meaning that theoretically, even if the company is not aware that it's making a payment to a sanctioned party, it may still be civilly liable.
Okay, so let me play the board member. Great, guys. You're telling me I'm being extorted. You're telling me I may not be able to pay. There's a Damoclean sword hanging over this company. And in the meantime, we have important clients and customers who expect us to fix this. Their businesses are down. Keep going. Tell me what else we have to be doing here to possibly resolve this and get to a decision point. And I, as a board member, I recognize what our culture is, but our culture may just be a guideline, okay? Because if we don't have a business at the end of the day, our culture is not worth anything.
Absolutely. And this is where working with counsel is so critical, because a core decision is, do you engage with the threat actor? Do you contact them? And then what do you ask? What is your strategy there? And that in part depends on what you're hearing about the state of your backups and your data. We know here we're in trouble. So we can engage the threat actor to find out what is the ransom demand. That is typically not provided in the initial extortion event. They give you a timeline.
We just got a communication. It's 3.75 mil.
All right. Now we can go forward. Is that standard for that threat actor? Now you want to work by working with a firm that's experienced with this. What do they typically negotiate down? Do they reduce the payment? And what is your strategy for that? So are you going to, one, verify? Regardless, actually, you need to verify that the threat actor has the capabilities they're extorting you for. Do they have your data? Can they provide a file tree? Can they provide any proof of what they stole for you that they're claiming they will delete upon payment? Secondly, because there is an encryption event associated with the loss of access to systems, we need to identify, can the threat actor actually decrypt data? Typically, you're going to find that out by sending sample files of non-critical data for the threat actor to validate decryption. Now, that's the direct engagement with the threat actor. You also need to know the threat actor's history. When they provide a decryptor, does it typically work? If it's a new group, if they very rarely is there a fully new group, they've evolved from someone else. So we want to look at that history there. Do they typically steal the data? Do they lie about how much data they stole? Hint there, they almost always lie about how much they stole. So we have to go through that history of how much should you believe this threat actor, and is it worth that money? If in that engagement you determine yes, payment is still likely, we have now gathered even more data as the investigation has been going on to go, who is this threat actor? What has the communications from your environment been from a technical perspective? So we can, again, further do that due diligence on who is this threat actor and what is that sanctions exposure to which you're opening yourself.
That's all consistent with my experience. The only other thing I'd add, we haven't discussed yet opening up a channel of communication with law enforcement, but
That's what I was going to ask next, Raul.
Okay,
That's
got a
you
mic
talk
now.
to the regulators. Are they working in lockstep?
Yeah.
Do they know, et cetera? And let me I just want to back up one thing. In terms of these negotiations, it is implicit. And by the way, Kelly is waiting with bated breath in terms of what you can in turn tell the markets and to indicate some degree of progress in this thing. But what is implicit here, it's not just opening up negotiations, it's who is opening up negotiations, who is speaking on behalf of the company, who is communicating with the other side. And you want people, the old axiom of kids don't try this at home. This is not something that companies should be engaged in on their own. You want people who are experienced with these actors, know how to communicate, know what to say, et cetera. And obviously, and I'm going to get into your point about, is law enforcement, regulators involved yet? What guidance are they giving? They may have intel on the group, et cetera, and you want to share that. But one of the things that we've spoken about is, while these crimes are new from a technological standpoint, new portals, there is I'll call it an analog in the physical world to kidnapping. Some of the very same questions that people ask when there is a kidnapping, and that's why the FBI has, particularly deep experience in this, is you want to know that the group that's calling with the ransom actually is the group that's involved. There's, I'll call it proof of life, that you sort of have the individual and they're alive, and there's someone that can be returned. There is a negotiation that often goes on. And then, of course, if you do negotiate and decide to negotiate as opposed to refuse the demands, how do you know you get back what you're bargaining for? Okay. And how do you know it's not going to happen again and again? So I just to simplify what we're going through here. And again, in a traditional kidnapping, you have communications experts, you also have legal advice, you have law enforcement, and hopefully you have people who are very experienced in the negotiation. So, Rahul, you were about to jump in with a very important critical decision for the company, whether law enforcement is engaged.
Yes. So we typically see that law enforcement is engaged in these situations, especially such a serious situation as the scenario we're discussing. There are different levels of engagement. There are notification forms that can be put into the FBI, which will alert law enforcement to the incident. And then there are more proactive measures that are also taken by certain companies. And that's reaching out to FBI agent who the company is familiar with or counsel is familiar with, who's either focused on cyber or someone that is liaisoned with the company in the past. And going back to the discussion about sanctions and compliance, that's another source of information that could potentially give the company some level of assurance on the compliance front. Our experience is that the FBI in particular will try to assist. They treat corporate victims as we see them, as victims, will give whatever help they can and provide information that may be relevant, such as if law enforcement has any view on whether this threat actor is associated with a sanctioned party. They may offer some additional IOCs or indicators of compromise that the forensic advisors or the company could use to try to narrow down who the threat actor is. The downside is potentially once you're having an active engagement with law enforcement, they may have requests of the company. They may not be burdensome, but they could become burdensome over time. And so the company has to weigh that. And there have been investigations of companies themselves. The federal government, as far as I am aware, does not investigate cybersecurity readiness of companies, meaning the criminal authorities, DOJ, and the FBI. But if other crimes are committed in the course of a cyber incident, we've seen cases like insider trading investigations, obstruction of justice investigations. And so anytime you involve law enforcement, there's that risk of an investigation taking a turn that you didn't expect. But generally, we do see for major incidents, for major companies, there's some level of notification and communication with law enforcement.
Again, a managed process for a whole. I actually want to unpack because you said a number of very, very important points. So, look, there is now material inside information about the company. It's a publicly traded company, and that information has a value in the marketplace, okay, in terms of the nature and scope. And so, obviously, Kelly, you'll be careful in the messaging that we give to the markets, but people do have to be reminded to not share this information with outsiders and obviously not to trade. The point about the FBI and what might be requested, just to unpack that a little bit, they might want to have access to the systems to see what they can learn and to be helpful. There are also, questions that might arise afterwards, which damned if you do, damned if you don't. Why didn't you call in law enforcement sooner? That could have been of assistance. They may also have a view about whether ransomware should be paid, whether formally or informally have that view. And so just to your point, Rahul, there are a multitude of considerations. This is probably the area where perfection is the enemy of the good, because there'll be no perfection. And I know that the FBI has taken great pains to try to communicate with the business sector that we will be aligned. We are not here to embarrass. We're not here to, disclose certain things. We're not here to take advantage of an exploitation and rummage around your systems. They have tried very hard to demonstrate and communicate what I'll refer to as the public-private sector initiatives around this. And so, again, I would just say management of that process with outside counsel, knowing a trusted representative of law enforcement. I'm taking those as very important, not only lessons, but steps that in advance a company can take to prepare for these types of situations.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Just one point I'd make is that on the FBI and DOJ, you talked about the pains they've taken to communicate to the business sector. The SEC and other civil regulators have brought cases, have brought investigations of victims of cyber attacks for potential disclosure of violations. We alluded to them earlier. And then other regulators under their own jurisdictions have also investigated corporate victims for either not accurately making representations to consumers. That's the FTC hook. Banking regulators have their own jurisdiction over safety and compliance in banks. And so I just want to note that there is a distinction between the federal government here and what perspective they bring to these situations.
And a consistent view is not what's the Emerson quote about what I'll refer to as simple consistency being the hobgoblin of small minds. The government's entitled to have a multitude of views on a particular situation. To your point, there's the SEC. There could be banking regulators. There are congressional investigations that get convened. And of course, we have class action lawyers who, will be looking at this. And once again, there's a legal issue. So, Kelly, we have some pieces here. We have, although our executives are still over the ocean, we have board leadership. We have brought together outside counsel. The appropriate authorities have been contacted. We have appropriate forensic people who are working on this. And there has been a ransom request. What are you suggesting? And word is leaking out. I mean, it's you're reading about what's going on in the company on social media, Bloomberg's calling in, et cetera, et cetera. What are you potentially putting together as a potential communication for the company, both externally, internally to their employees and to their clients and customers?
Well, now it definitely has to be updated from presumably the first statement, and maybe even there was an evolution beyond that one. Sometimes at the very outset, you can get away with a data incident, then maybe it evolves. At this stage, we need to, again, identify the stakeholders, acknowledge that the threat actor has made this claim without acknowledging that they're to Colleen's point, it might not even be who claims the threat actor may not even be who they claim they are. So we acknowledge that this claim has been made and that data has been allegedly posted on a shaming site and that we are evaluating it. But it's looking at all of your audiences. Do we need to look at your top tier customers and do something more proactively with them? Or do we do everything reactively? And at all stages, but at this stage, it is very important to not panic and think this is turning into a bigger issue than it may be. I mean, it sounds like it probably would, but if you're not getting very many employee questions about this, if you're not getting customer demands, if the media isn't really covering it and you've just gotten the one inquiry, can you stay reactive? And this is the reason that the advisors need to hold these regular calls to discuss the situation real time and what's our best course of action at this stage. On the law enforcement point, we don't weigh in on that. That's the company's decision with counsel, but it is a very good communication point that we are involving law enforcement because it shows that we're taking the matter very seriously. Just getting back to another of Colleen's points, on planning ahead, we really like to see clients develop a tightly held decision tree on pay or no pay. An issue like this that's involving healthcare and private data, it would have been good to look at that in advance. And companies who pound on the table and say, I'm not going to pay, after a couple days, weeks of being paralyzed, sometimes they change that very definitive position that they've had. But evolving the communication now, deciding whether to communicate with media and other stakeholders is obviously critical at this phase.
Okay.
And if I can,
please.
If I can add to what Kelly was walking through there, some critical points that your forensics and or negotiations firm should be advising is whether the threat actor has a history of contacting the media themselves, whether the threat actor has a history of calling or contacting a victim's clients, and then whether they also have a history of calling or otherwise harassing with internal applications and employees, because many threat actors have evolved their pressure tactics, is what we typically call them, in the last few years, and they become very persistent. They notify clients, they reach out. So if you do not have a communications plan, the threat actor might be deciding it for you.
Well, actually, this is a proactive group, so you've anticipated the next step accurately. And I think, just to emphasize something why this is a recurring issue, why it's likely not to go away anytime soon. All the experts, this is to the audience, all the experts on our panel and others, this is a business. Let's be clear about this at this point. It is no different than many other businesses. There are low barriers of entry into this field now because of the, we'll call it ubiquitous nature of some of the tools. You have threat actors who understand that, it's sort of low cost, low risk, high reward. It does not take all that much to have a successful attack. There's a high reward. And because of the remote nature of the actors, very often operating with a certain degree of anonymity, also in jurisdictions where there is impunity, et cetera, why would you not do this? There's a high ROI around this activity. So the incentives in the marketplace for ransomware are very much there. And are going to remain there for the foreseeable future. So if you think about this as a business and they're doing what they're doing, okay, the next step is they are letting our clients know that their systems, their individual, they are now inside our clients' systems and they're rummaging around, and there has been a ransomware to unlock, decrypt the data of our company. But the longer that we wait to meet their demands, the more exposed our clients are. And they are putting additional pressure on this. This in turn, Kelly, I only wish this was a quiet matter, but it is not a quiet matter. And the markets haven't opened, but pre-market trading indicates that, we're going to be hit by 20% in our stock price. Okay, so that's, people are wondering what is occurring here. How are we doing in terms of attribution? How are we doing in terms of negotiations? And have we reached a standpoint from a cost-benefit analysis, no less, Rahul, from coordination with law enforcement, whether it makes sense, quite frankly, paying this ransom is a rounding error on our balance sheet for getting this stuff back. And by the way, since our forensic team is here by virtue of our insurance policy, do we have insurance coverage here?
So every action a threat actor takes, from the pressure tactic to the demands themselves, to the calls, to the actions in the victim environment and what's happening there, all tell us who they are. At this point, we have enough to know and say with high confidence that the threat actor is who they say they are, and the threat actor or no element of them are listed on the OFAC SDN list or any other international sanctions regime. Therefore, payment is legal. We have worked from a technical perspective to identify backups are not viable. The data exfiltrated is critical and exposes the company and the company's clients. So at this point, the question with the carrier becomes, what is within policy? Is the ransom demand within that? If it's not, how low can we get the threat actor? Now, there is something to be said. The threat actor is going to increase their pressure as much as they can, but we do see that the longer a negotiation goes, the greater the reduction you can get. So it's that, what's the level of hurt? What's the level of the threat actor's ability to continue to pressure you as well? Because they're going to move on to other victims. To your point of the business, they've got a queue of victims lined up that they're going to run through and iterate and extort. So it's that battle between them and what is your tolerance for pain, essentially, for the company that the threat actor is putting you through.
Yeah, and we have seen cities not pay ransomware.
Yep.
Municipalities, they endure the pain because they can. They're the government, and they work to get the backup. We don't have that luxury.
Nope.
Okay. And as Rahul said, we have a bunch of potential, I'll call it legal exposures based on hindsight analysis in part of what we've done and why we've done it. We noted at the beginning that we are servicing healthcare. There are critical operations at hospitals and other facilities where patient data and patient transactions have to occur. And so there's that additional pressure. I don't want to call it life and death, but there are some very, very critical things. And you've now established who these actors are. There's some individuals, but they are state sponsored by out of a sanctioned country. And Kelly is chomping at the bit because she wants to get a message out. Rahul, can we at least have Kelly put something together to say that at this time we are still working to get to the bottom of these issues to control or contain the exposures. We're working with leading law enforcement agencies. We're working with a leading law firm. We are working with several leading forensic advisors, and we will keep everyone posted, but rest assured, we are working to obviate this situation as quickly as possible. Can we at least be saying something like that to the marketplace?
Rahul's going to make us say that.
Yeah.
I was going to say, it looks like a model statement that you've probably used from one of the matters Kelly and I have worked on. I think that's a perfectly fine thing to say. The one point I might nitpick is I think you said we'll keep everyone posted. You may not need to say that because then you should keep people posted, and there might not be reason to do that in the future. But other than that, I think your description of the status is completely accurate, and you're not making any promises about the future. I will say on the ransomware payment discussion, you were just having a ransomware payment may solve a lot of problems. It doesn't solve every problem. For example, it does not relieve you if personal data has been accessed or obtained, and you're required to make notifications under state law. It's not a defense to say, I made the payment and the ransomware actor promised that they deleted the information. The information's already been accessed or obtained. It also does not relieve the company of making a materiality determination with respect to public disclosure. In our situation, the company's already making disclosure, but if it hadn't, simply making a payment doesn't relieve the obligation potentially. There had been some misconception about that in the past, both on the state legal obligations and potentially federally, but the regulators have gone out there and corrected the record on that. So I just did want to make that point.
And to keep
Great point.
on Rahul's point about not saying we'll keep you informed, often early on when we don't have anything, when we don't know enough, we'll say we'll keep you posted as more information becomes available. But we don't continue that in a prolonged incident. And if it's going on and people aren't thinking about it anymore, there's no reason to come back and say, hey, remember this ransomware incident we had last month? Well, nothing new to report right now. So there's no point in doing that. Don't set that expectation if it is not helping you with your stakeholders.
And obviously don't set expectations beyond what you actually know. So let me just go back earlier, a point I should have tweezed out of you. It's not just the message, Kelly, it's the messenger that matters as well. So choosing an appropriate spokesperson for the organization, both in terms of their abilities, but also their title. And also what goes on in these situations is the media is requesting interviews with people on the record, off the record, deep background, etc. And again, you'll coordinate with Rahul around that. But can you give our audience on this webinar a sense of the types of inquiries that do come in and the requests that are made of the company?
Yes, so we will get inquiries from everyone from the cybersecurity trades, which are basically a jumping off point for the mainstream media to find out about these things. So we have to take them seriously, but they'll send us, a list of 15 questions. We are not, first of all, while a matter is being investigated, we don't have the information to share. So we typically draft a written statement attributable to a spokesperson for the company versus putting someone out there to do media interviews. So we keep it contained to our statements, but as we want to provide color or make people understand things, sometimes we'll hold background discussions, which means it's not a quote from the company, but we're helping the reporter understand aspects of the incident without giving away anything confidential that's going on in the investigation. And then in terms of spokespeople, this is one thing I wanted to mention earlier. There should be a small group of people that agrees on what this information you're going to disseminate is, and not let every employee in the company think they can freelance the answers to all of your stakeholders. So there needs to be an escalation process for employees to know how to refer questions on as they're getting them from all stakeholders.
And that includes so-called off-the-record, deep background, et cetera, which is people think they can have a confidential conversation with the reporter, deep background, and down the road it doesn't work. Okay.
If anyone's going to do that, it's us, and it's only going to be with trusted reporters. Right.
All right. I'm going to advance the scenario. There's some, we'll call it some state sponsors behind this that are on the OFAC list and international sanctions. This is a group that has done this before. They do have control of the data. They're increasing the pressure. The ransomware now has gone up, believe it or not, to $5 million. And we are in the process of negotiating with them. And we want to make sure if we do pay, our systems are restored. To Rahul's point, we know that the data will never be completely returned or perfectly returned, but it'll be returned to us, but it'll reside out there. We'll worry about the notifications and other disclosures a little bit down the road. But basically, can you take us through the final points of negotiation? And again, I want to use the analog of a kidnapping where you want to make sure, they continue to have what they have and that we're going to get back what we essentially pay for. And how do we do that?
If the threat actor is determined to be state sponsored or have a state nexus and or is listed on the sanctions list, any sanctions list, at that point, it becomes no pay. So most of your facilitation firms will step back at that point because we cannot facilitate a payment and have it be legally defensible in that case. At that point,
let me stop you because I'm going to say to Rahul, can't you call your friends down at Treasury and get a license? Because right now there are our clients, real world patients, people in hospitals. This is causing disruption in the financial markets. There are second, third, fourth, fifth orders of consequences with the clients. You can't hold us up on this. What can you do so that Colleen can finish the negotiation?
No, you can. You're absolutely right. There is a license process at OFAC. Practically, I don't know if you would have the time, and OFAC, at least the last administration, communicated that there would be a presumptive denial, not a definite denial, but a presumption. And so that is not something that companies should rely on necessarily being available. So at the end of the day, it's going to be a risk assessment based on the information that potentially provided by law enforcement. There'll be a communication about this topic potentially with your insurers because they don't want payments going to sanctioned parties and they want to make sure there's
They may deny coverage down the road, right? Okay.
They may deny coverage, but they also prophylactically will not want to facilitate a payment to a sanctioned party. And so they'll have their own procedures. And so, it's a situation where ultimately it almost always comes down to a risk assessment because you won't have perfect information. And as you said earlier, you cannot let the perfect be the enemy of the good, particularly in this type of decision.
Okay, so I am that board member. I am that who's I'm the CEO of another major company. I'm just going to extrapolate from my experience at Goldman Sachs. I am a master of the universe. I'm used to getting things done and having control of a situation. And what you guys are telling me is while the stock price is dropping, and I may have a way out here for the release of the data, restoring day-to-day operations, that I'm truly on the horns of a dilemma. Damned if I do, damned if I don't. And if I can offer an editorial comment, which may or may not be protected by your privilege, the government hasn't protected businesses from this international threat. And if I'm going to do an analog, if these guys were coming on shore in submarines and rowboats and getting into my systems and stealing data, I would know who to call and we'd have a response. But we're not there. What am I supposed to be doing here? Because the market's open in 2 hours. Our clients are already calling. We're in a state of chaos. I need to get this company back on track and figure out not only how to remediate as quickly as possible, prevent this situation, but also limit liability down the road. I owe these fiduciary duties to our investors.
So from the negotiations perspective, we have already at this point in phase gotten verification from the threat actor that they have what data they have to some degree. So we can inform the decision into the communications that Kelly and Rahul prep. But from that negotiations and response to the threat actor, registered firms, registered money services businesses for doing that facilitation, that sanctions exposure tied to the carrier, and particularly if there is a reinsurer involved, the ransom demand is high enough. All of them say they won't touch it once you have that sanctions exposure. We do see some companies then decide, you know what, let me roll the dice and see what OFAC does. There hasn't been enforcement yet. Maybe there won't, and they go their own way at that point. But that is something it introduces a high level of risk.
Okay, you're all familiar with the axiom, which is playing out certainly in the first quarter of 2025. Businesses love certainty, and so what you're presenting here is an uncertain outcome. Even if I can get the data back, restore, protect my clients, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so. Well, you will lay out the risk in a very, very good way, and you'll say it's a business decision that has to be made here. Okay, so I'm going to make the business decision that we're going to have to live with the consequences, but we have to restore this. And Rahul, would you please let the FBI? We're not going to do this secretly, but let the authorities know that we are paying this ransom because there's potential lives at jeopardy, and obviously significant other companies are now at risk. And so we have to do something here, unless, of course, the authorities can intervene and get us back the data and decrypt and otherwise go after the threat actors. And we'll give them that opportunity, but we need to do something and do something quickly. And Kelly, you're thinking about, what we're going to be saying down the road here. So business decision is made. It's tough. Rahul, thank you for your advice and counsel. We're going to rely on you to mitigate this. Colleen, I need you to negotiate, get us our data back.
We transfer the communications to you, and you are on the hook for facilitating the payment, obtaining the cryptocurrency, and managing that. We will continue with the response practices in the environment, but we will not facilitate or finalize the negotiations.
So now we're left truly on our own to do this, okay? And are you helping us with the script? Are you helping at least being able to advise us about any kind of negotiation, how to ensure we get something back here for the money that we're now paying? Are you at least able to do that?
We would have been far enough into the negotiations to get you right up to the wire. We have every bit of information. We have that proof of life that they have your data. We have that proof of decryption. At that point, it is merely a matter of the facilitation component, verifying the final amounts, doing test payments, and then facilitating the payment. We will not advise the procurement of cryptocurrency to that end.
Or maybe this is part of the preparation advice, all companies, because of ransomware demands, should have already somewhere in their inventory a certain amount of digital currency to pay these things. All right, let me tweak the scenario a little bit. Rahul, through your firm's efforts, Treasury has indicated they are going to issue a license. They just haven't done it yet. Colleen, you now know that Treasury is going to give us a license to negotiate with these people. Or maybe we have done additional work and found out there is no sanctioned state sponsor behind this group. But we are able to proceed in some way. Kelly looks relieved. Rahul is still, thinking about second and third orders of consequences. Take us through the end point of the negotiation, what we're asking for, what we're seeing.
Absolutely. So if there's no sanctions exposure and that component's been remediated, at that point, the negotiations can continue to further get the payment to the lowest possible amount that is then agreeable to the business. At that point, and in the course of these negotiations with the firm that will be doing the facilitated payment, there will be know your customer rules and requirements there to verify the company and the company's components to align with regulations there for that payment facilitation. Then once all of the company is green and the council is directing on behalf of the company that a payment be facilitated, your firm can then, the negotiations and facilitation firm can then facilitate the payment. There's going to be a test payment initially, as long as the wallet also clears sanctions exposure. And then the full payment itself. From there, there is the receipt of deliverables. So the proof of deletion is going to come a variety of ways. A lot of the times it's a video of deletion. And then that proof, the threat actor will provide decryptors. And very important to validate in that negotiations process which decryptors that you would be receiving. And then you can start to run those decryptors. Some threat actors may then provide tech support if the decryptors don't work initially, which is a very real possibility. So there will be some ongoing communication back and forth. Again, that's where the history comes into play, because there are some threat actors that have a history of non-delivery of the agreed upon deliverables, particularly proof of deletion. Or problems with the decryptors, but assuming those all go well, it's a matter of applying those to the environment. It is not instantaneous to decrypt or rebuild, though, particularly if it's a virtualized environment. So if you're heavy in the cloud, you're heavily in virtual machines, recovery is still going to take a while. The decryptor is not a silver bullet.
Okay. And about how long does it take in your experience, just so people can think this through?
For recovery of critical systems, that can typically happen across 48 hours from receipt of the decryptors. For full environment recovery, you're still looking at several weeks.
So, Rahul, quick question. We've let the authorities know that we're negotiating, we're paying, etc. I assume in some ways, again, I'll do the analog to physical kidnapping. We're coordinating so that law enforcement can follow the trail of money here a bit and see where it goes, and sharing with them the details of the negotiations and the payments. That would be my assumption. Is that fair to say as well?
That's a fair assumption. That does get requested from law enforcement, not always, but it does happen depending on the level of incident and, frankly, the agent that you're dealing with and how actively they're pursuing this particular threat actor. I would say that companies should not assume that the money will ever be recovered. The FBI will swoop in and arrest the bad guys. It does happen. It is extremely rare, just given the scope of these groups and how dispersed they are all over the globe and their level of sophistication. It's extremely rare for law enforcement to actually act quickly enough in order for the company to see any tangible results from their cooperation with law enforcement to that scale.
At least, and I say this to Kelly as well, and as a legal matter, at least we, and I'm speaking as a board member, we can at least document what we are doing and trying to do. We're trying to work constructively with the authorities around this matter and to be of assistance and to effect transparency. So if we're facing class action suits or inquiries from the SEC or attorney generals, we can at least point to our efforts in that regard, which may be meaningful in terms of a disposition of any inquiries that might come post facto. Okay, so I want to, in the few minutes we have left, we've restored the data. We're back up. Our stock price is still down. The market is open. And Kelly, you're putting together with Rahul a statement for the markets. And also, we're getting inquiries from the regulators, not surprisingly. And we're getting, obviously, investor relations is anxious to go out there and talk to people. And of course, internally, we have to explain ourselves a little bit. Give us a sense of the types of communication that you think would be critical here. Again, we're not going to erase the problem, but at least mitigate it a bit.
Yeah, at this stage, so we had the middle stage where we are acknowledging that something has occurred and that we're working on it. This stage will be a communication plan to let people know that we are back in business, safe to do business with, up and running. We don't discuss the ins and outs of ransomware negotiations and whether we paid or did not pay in Rahul, almost any case of those that I've worked on. The most we might say if we paid is we did everything necessary to keep our stakeholders' data safe. But this is the close the book on this thing with communication to all audiences. You're still going to get requests from CISOs and others to come in and do postmortems. So again, we work closely with legal on what that communication is. And before we send people out to those meetings, we typically do run-throughs with them where I am the agitated client asking questions to help them get comfortable with the answers that they're going to deliver to keep everything okay in the legal arena.
So those are the FAQs. Rahul, earlier you alluded to the likely aftermath of inquiries from regulatory bodies, inquiries from what I'll refer to as significant stakeholders. These would be some of the major shareholders, inquiries obviously from our clients, customers, and generally we're already alluding to the media and the postmortem that has to be done. What are you advising the board? And guess what? Our executives finally landed in Singapore. And they have to be briefed on all of this as well, and trying to maintain the privilege of, what has occurred. But give our audience today a sense of what a company should be prepared for in the aftermath of this, and how they have to be able to think about the resources and the team to be applied.
Yeah, so what typically would occur after an incident like this is exactly what you previewed. There are potentially claims by individuals. There are potentially claims by other stakeholders. There have been derivative claims by shareholders brought against directors and officers after incidents like this for alleged breaches of fiduciary duty. There have been claims brought by payment card companies to the extent they have to reimburse their own customers from fraud that's committed after an incident like this. So there's a whole panoply of potential civil claims. From the regulator perspective, the state AGs are very active. We've referenced that there are state laws that specifically apply. There are also more broadly applicable laws that they investigate, such as consumer protection laws. They often, in the larger matters, the state AGs will coordinate with each other. So you may be in the face of a group of state AGs that are investigating, sending very detailed and burdensome information requests in the potential to create a claim or investigation of the company. And then the SEC the FTC and banking regulators, HHS, which is relevant here since we're talking about health information, Department of Human Health and Services. We always see some level of activity in one of those three areas, civil, state, or federal, after a significant incident like this. And what's critical really in that defense is everything we've been talking about in how the company responded, how it documented its response, the care it took to take the precautions that Colleen was talking about with respect to handling the incident and communications. All that is very, very critical evidence, and that's why a lot of this might be enveloped under privilege. And then, there will be a look back, of course, as to what the company had in place prior to the incident. And from a practical perspective, but also from a litigation perspective, thinking about remediation and fixing obvious vulnerabilities and doing new risk assessments in light of the lessons learned is critical, not only for the business, but from a legal standpoint, and I imagine from a communication standpoint as well.
I was just going to say, so that we're not going to give away all of the details of the new measures you've put in place, but we always emphasize that you've hardened your defenses and are making changes to prevent something like this from happening in the future. Not say, make sure this will never happen in the future again, because we never say that, because that's not possible, but just demonstrating that you did take it seriously. And that wasn't the end of it when the incident ended. You are taking these measures to harden your defenses for the company. So one thing we kind of skipped over here, we've got the investigation, we've got the systems back up and running. All this time, you're investigating what PII, personally identifiable information, was taken. It's going to be a while after the incident is resolved before those letters are going to start going out. So there's kind of a part B after you've finally made it through the initial incident that is another big communication incident that we have to be ready for as well.
Okay, and embedded in what you've been saying, Rahul's been saying, is the authorities are going to want to know sort of what happened, why it happened, and the extent of the damage, which will only be learned over time, some degree of time, and obviously how you handled and responded, and what reasonable measures you had before. I just a couple of follow-on questions, and then I want to sort of sum this up with you guys. But it is, from a communication standpoint and market standpoint, I don't want to say people are numb to these, but they're far more used to this than back in the days when Equifax, for example, had their significant breach. And I'm just curious, in terms of the communication, and it's not just public communications, Kelly, but Rahul, in terms of your interactions with authorities, the fact that we're not alone here. This is not the first time, it's not the last time. And in fact, I think it can be pointed out that even the most sophisticated government agencies have, been compromised. The US Treasury incurred a successful attack back in 2024, just I think it was the last quarter of 2024. And so how much of that enters into your communications, your public communications, as well as your discussions with regulators?
For discussions with the regulators, it's certainly front and center. You may not specifically poke the SEC that they've been attacked multiple times during your conversations with them, but there are ways you can obviously make the point that the company is just one of many entities that is under attack, and most companies we advise are doing a lot. They're doing the best they can with the resources they have to keep up. And unfortunately, it's become an inevitable risk of doing business that's materialized for a lot of companies. But that is a critical point. Some regulators are more receptive to it than others, but it's definitely a point to be made.
And it's a point to be made with other audiences without shrugging and saying, hey, it was going to happen. It happens to everyone. Plus, your stakeholders are still impacted. If they can't use your systems, if they're going to get letters that their personal information was stolen, that is still real impact, even though these are happening a lot.
And I
If
assume,
there's
go ahead, please.
Yeah, if there's 2 points I can add is within all of the communication, and Rahul mentioned it briefly earlier, threat actors are reading this too, your communications publicly, not just the threat actor responsible for this intrusion and attack, but other threat actors. And so how you publicly communicate, more even than the decision to pay a ransom, we've seen far more impacts the likelihood of re-victimization, as maybe other threat actors send extortion demands after an attack that have no proof of data exfiltration, that aren't able to provide that proof of life we talked about. Or in the follow-on months, if you report too in depth on any improvements and hardening decisions you've made, you're giving a blueprint to a threat actor on how to exploit your environment. So these are all things threat actors are considering. And then one other point is, so you mentioned the investigation, we don't fully know the impact and what happened. One of the critical steps that we see organizations take is to add a dark web monitoring component. One, maybe you did pay for data deletion. You want to see if the threat actor lied to you and if that data goes out, because you don't want somebody else to tell you that first. You need to start looking on the dark web outside of the individual monitoring you may purchase for individuals exposed, but searching
Because
for
your
corporate
clients are
data.
looking for it. I've had clients of my clients advise them that something's on the dark web before they knew.
Yes, so dark web monitoring is critical, but also with the retroactive piece, did you have credentials to your environment? Did you have something of your environment sold on the dark web, which potentially influenced this attack? You want to know that first. You do not want to find that out from somebody else or from a regulator as you're in those conversations. So dark web, it's a kind of follow-on activity that also supports the current investigation and preps your next step, which is just a critical point.
When you talk about follow-on, everything you guys have been speaking about in the perspectives, the term ounce of prevention being worth a pound of cure, having these things in place, for instance, dark web monitoring to see whether you're a threat, but also, and Rahul, I know your firm and Kelly, your firm, if you're seeing sort of why your industry, I'll call it broadly, is being targeted. It was counterintuitive to many people. Why are they bothering with healthcare companies, for example? Like, it's not quite the same as breaking into a bank system and, moving money directly. Understanding why your company is a potential target, why your industry is a target, understanding the nature of these threats. But obviously, there's going to be a postmortem, and as a board member, I'm going to hope that not only the lessons that we've learned here, but what we need to do more proactively and to stay on top of this issue. I mean, it's very easy to say, but this is an evolving threat, and so companies, this is not a once in time. They have to stay close with their law firms, their public relations strategists, and the forensic experts in terms of what they have to continue to think about in terms of these environments. And also coordination, the law enforcement community, regulatory community has been, I'll actually use the term, pretty open and generous in trying to brief people about emerging threats. And so staying on top of that will be critical. Let me give you, each of you, just a closing 30 seconds, 60 seconds in terms of what should the company be doing now to put in place to more carefully formalize. And Rahul, I am nervous as all hell that anything we put in here is going to be a signal to the class action firms and regulators that we weren't adequately prepared. But what can we do to thread the needle to make sure we get to the bottom of this, but we're also better prepared going forward?
I would give two kind of basic building blocks. One, Kelly alluded to a communications plan. There is a critical document also known as the incident response plan. Most companies have one at this point, but it's critical to make sure it's kept up to date. It's reviewed, it's on the ready. for a potential incident. It's also a good record to have for plaintiffs, potential plaintiffs, and regulators if they come call. And then secondly, doing something just like we did today, which is tabletop exercises with the board, with management. You can include forensic advisors, legal advisors, mix it up, but doing something either internally or bringing in third parties to exercise the muscle memory that we've been doing today, which is invaluable in preparing. And again, something that these days is expected of companies. And so it does help with your legal defenses should you need them down the road.
Kelly.
Mine are actually identical to Rahul's with a little different color. So the communication strategy is super important, but keeping it up to date. We were brought back for a 5-year-old one that we did, and the new types of incidents that arise, you forget that there are new things and they weren't in there. Now we're looking at AI and deep fakes. So just making sure you're keeping that current. And a lot of companies think that they exercise their cyber plans regularly with tabletops, but those are typically forensics and technical. So we encourage the C-suite and board level where they, again, are thinking about the different aspects of things and not just solving the technical aspects. So those are, again, my 2 takeaways, just like that.
I'll agree with my fellow panelists there. The incident response plan is critical. And I will add the component of a printed incident response plan at all of your offices because it does you no good if it is encrypted. It needs to also include your carrier, your insurance carrier, and your external counsel if you plan to use one. Know that ahead of time. If you are at high risk for an extortion event, look at retainers with your forensics firms or with a negotiations firm. So you have those conversations, and the people who you're on a call on some of the worst days of your professional career are people you know and are prepared to work with, and they know what you need to be successful in this response. So that prep there of knowing who's going to be on the call in your crisis is so critical. And then finally, my recommendation coming in with the technical perspective at the end, but don't think of this as highly targeted activity. The majority of threat actors, they get into an environment and their first command is, who am I? Because they are just looking for vulnerabilities, they are looking for gaps, and then they figure out what you're worth. So follow basic hygiene, patch and assess exploited vulnerabilities, use multi-factor authentication. I know it's annoying. It is so incredibly valuable to preventing attacks. The majority come from exploited vulnerabilities that we knew about and we didn't patch or assess compromise. Multi-factor authentication, monitoring for exposed credentials. These things will help you so much because it's not targeted. So often it's not targeted. It's the threat actors. It's a random act of violence, unfortunately. And it's highly successful and a highly profitable random act of violence.
And we're about to start baseball season, so I always think of them as the utility players. They don't care where they're playing. They're just on the field. And the threat, because of the rewards, low barriers of entry, low costs, et cetera, high rewards, virtual impunity, et cetera. There's no reason for these things to go away. And that's not to alarm people. It's just, it's the new reality as we become more reliant on our digital portals. I will also, you guys have been a little bit too humble. I know each of you and your firms have been incredibly proactive, I'll use the word generous, in actually putting together checklists and crisis management plans and things like that. So we're going to post those things alongside this webinar so that people can access that as well. Colleen, I'll mention something about the insurance industry. I'm a student of the physical world here, but the role of insurance is not simply to issue policies and coverage and bring people on the scene when there is a situation. Very often, and this goes back to the early days of insurance in the United States, is to have codes of uniformity in terms of safety standards. First started in the area of fire prevention, and so I know each of your firms have made some great suggestions. We don't exactly have uniformity in various industries, but we have guidelines, and you formerly were at MITRE and where you put out some great publications. So I want to, you guys have been a little bit too humble on this webinar, but each of you have been great thought leaders in this area in helping companies to think through these things, not only when the hair is on fire, but in advance to mitigate, if not obviate. And I think it's an important lesson. You've highlighted it. These actors go to the points of least resistance. There's an old expression: how fast do you have to be to outrun a bear? Just faster than the other person. Okay, so there's some element to that as well. And it's probably on the 15th anniversary, maybe, of saying these are not if events. It's just really when and how bad and how quickly you can detect and contain. So that's part of the agility that I've heard in everything you guys have been saying. So thank you again for sharing your perspectives, your experience, great insights. Look forward to a continued conversation. And again, we'll be posting written materials alongside this webinar. So Rahul, Kelly, Colleen, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
for facilitating.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, we have much more in store for you. RANE's leading risk intelligence platform is built for organizations to anticipate, monitor, and respond to emerging threats, providing trusted intelligence for enterprise resilience. To learn more, visit ranenetwork.com. That's RANE network.com.